This is a response to 10 questions that every intelligent Christian must answer. I intend to answer all your questions, as well as pose a few of my own, but first I would like to state that if you are asking me to prove God, then I am afraid I will disappoint you. I do not claim that I can prove God, any more than you can disprove God. You can only prove that which is quantifiable. God is infinite. While I do not know all there is to know, and am not able to prove to you that God exists, I hope that you will at least take the time to see and listen, and consider my responses carefully. I have tried to be thorough, but not too verbose with my responses. My questions, however, required in-depth explanations, and so I tried to provide as much as I could without making it so long and boring that no one would see or listen to it. Lastly, I have to admit that given the phrasing of the questions, I believe that, as far as the author is concerned, my answers will likely fall on deaf ears. I hope that I am wrong. I'm making this video mostly for others who might see this, so believers might better prepare themselves to debate such things, so that agnostics might see Scripture in a new non-religious way, and so intellectual atheists might see that God and provable science aren't at odds. The 10-question video I will respond to is clearly intended to be quite a clever attack on Christianity. However, the admittedly clever start quickly degrades into a cavalcade of fallacious argumentation based on false premises and outright insults about morality. Before I dig into the 10-question video itself, allow me to write a bit about what is morally right and wrong. All these attacks on Christianity always fall into the same argument. They assume that there's some kind of universal moral code, which states what is right and wrong, and which every sane person agrees with. There's no such a thing as a universal moral code. What is morally wrong in your opinion might not be in someone else's opinion. Even in extreme cases. For example, the United States has capital punishment. In their moral code, it's justifiable to kill certain people for certain crimes. Many other countries abolish capital punishment. Who is morally right here? Are they right? Or are you right? In many countries abortion is legal, while in others it's illegal. Who is right here? Is your moral code correct and theirs incorrect? Why? Some countries have an age of consent of 14 years, for example Canada, while there are other countries where the age of consent is 21 years, such as Bahrain. Who is morally right here? Them or you? Let me repeat. There's no such a thing as a universal moral code. Now, just humor me for a moment, and allow me to pose a completely hypothetical situation. You don't have to agree with it, but just go with me for a moment. Let's assume, hypothetically, that God does exist, and that He is enormously wiser than we are. Let's compare this to a situation where there's a wise father and a small child. The child would want to eat ice cream whenever he wants. However, his father denies him the ice cream. The child just can't understand why his father is denying the ice cream. In his world, ice cream is good. No ice cream is bad. He may feel that not getting ice cream is an injustice. The knowledge and wisdom of the child is very limited, and thus he just can't understand why his father knows better than him why he shouldn't be eating all the ice cream he wants. Even if he tries to explain to the child the reason, the child may be too small to truly understand it. If the child disobeys his father, and eats ice cream furtively and gets caught, his father may punish him for that. Not only was eating the ice cream bad, but not obeying his father was also bad. The child may feel that the punishment was unjust and cruel. Two things may happen: the child starts obeying his father, and when he grows up he ends up understanding the reasons why his father behaved like he did, and he may end up grateful to him. Alternatively, he may start disobeying him, grow obese, suffer a heart attack, and then regret that he didn't obey his father, who was much wiser than him. Now, still completely hypothetically. Please still humor me. Wouldn't it be at least remotely conceivable that if God did indeed exist and was enormously wiser than us, He knew something we don't, and that His reasons for doing things might be something we don't understand yet? Because we are unable to see the whole picture? Moreover, Wouldn't it be even remotely possible that God, with his enormous wisdom, has a better morality code than we do, even though we don't yet understand why? Wouldn't it be possible that when we say, "Father, I want ice cream, please give me ice cream," and then he answers no, then even though we may feel that to be an injustice and a bad thing, there just might be a larger picture involved, and that there may be a good reason for the denial? I'm not saying you should accept this. I'm just asking a hypothetical question about fallacious arguments. Yet before I go to the video itself, let me explain a few fallacies. A straw man is a technique where you intentionally oversimplify something in order to make it look completely ridiculous. A couple of examples. The theory of evolution states that fish can jump to dry land, and grow feet and lungs and start walking around. That's just ridiculous. It also states that a species, such as a dog, can suddenly convert into a completely different species, such as a cat. That's just ridiculous. These are straw man arguments. They oversimplify the matter in question to the point where they become ridiculous and just false. Petitio principii. One common parlance, begging the question, is when a statement or question is made from false premises. The statement or question itself is thus invalid, because the premise is false. Two examples. Why don't we see any fish growing legs and lungs? Why don't we see any dogs converting into cats? These two questions are based on the false premises set up in the previous two examples. Thus the questions themselves are invalid and irrelevant. False dilemma is when in a situation only two options are given, and the assumption is made that either one of those options must be the truth even though alternative options may exist, and both of the original options may be false. Examples. Either fish can grow legs and lungs, or the theory of evolution is false. Either dogs can convert into cats, or the theory of evolution is false. These present just two options, as if they were the only possible ones, and one of them must be the truth. They disregard the possibility that there may be a third option, that the theory of evolution actually doesn't claim that fish can grow legs or that dogs can convert into cats. When straw men and false dilemmas are combined like this, almost any conclusion can be drawn. For example, let's assume for a moment that the theory of evolution is false and consider the questions already given. Question. Why don't we see any fish growing legs and lungs? Answer. Because the theory of evolution is false, and fish don't behave like it says. Question. Why don't we see any dogs converting into cats? Answer. Because the theory of evolution is false, and dogs don't behave like it says. Suddenly it all makes sense and is logical. This kind of deduction is based on false premises, oversimplification and plain distortion. Thus the deduction is completely irrelevant and invalid.
In this short video, I'm going to assume that you're an educated Christian. You have a college degree and you've been trained to think logically and rationally about the world we live in. For example, you might be an engineer or scientist, a doctor, pharmacist or nurse, a teacher, a manager or an administrator, a government employee, a business owner, an account rep, an executive, a lawyer, an accountant, a person working in the financial sector or human resources, an architect or designer, a software developer. In other words, you're a smart person. You know how the world works and you know how to think critically. If you're an educated Christian, I would like to talk with you today about an important and interesting question. Have you ever thought about using your college education to think about your faith? Your life and your career demand that you behave and act rationally. Let's apply your critical thinking skills as we discuss 10 simple questions about your religion.
The 10-question video begins in a seemingly complimentary fashion, where the narrator assumes the viewer is an intelligent, educated, reasonable person. As first hearing, this may sound flattering, but later in the video we will see it is not sincere. This is actually a rather transparent sales tactic we usually see employed by used car salesmen. See if this sounds familiar. I can tell that you're a shrewd buyer, so I'm going to make you a deal on this car. Have you ever heard something like that before? If I wanted to look like a shrewd buyer to the salesman, I might be afraid to say no to his offer. Likewise, no one wants to seem unintelligent or unreasonable, so he might feel like he has to admit some things about Christianity seem unreasonable. This is just a gimmick. And an overused one at that. Later in the 10-question video, the narrator turns the tables a little. Where he starts by assuming the viewer is intelligent and rational, he later says that Christians have no intelligent or rational answers to the questions. Instead, he suggests that intelligent and rational people will see that God is imaginary. This is a fallacious argument known as the No True Scotsman argument. Basically, the video is saying that every intelligent person knows that God is imaginary, and if you believe in God, then you're not intelligent. Another tactic I noticed is the narrator's use of loaded words. This is where someone attempts to diminish his opponent's point by describing it in unflattering terms. Let me give you an example. I could say, my opponent believes in evolution. Or I could say, my opponent believes in the crazy idea that, over billions of years, amoebas can turn into men. Substantively, there isn't a lot of difference between the statements, but there is a considerable difference in the impression it gives. We see much the same thing in the 10-question video. The narrator describes in advance any possible answer as being irrational. Along with using loaded words, the video is also attempting to poison the well. When you try to diminish your opponent's point before he makes it, you bias other people against his point. Like my already given example, what if I said something like this? My opponent is going to tell you that mutations are a mechanism that can introduce novel traits into a population. We normally call mutations birth defects when someone suggests they are the driving force behind evolution. It shows you how weak the theory is. The irony is that mutation truly is the driving mechanism that supposedly introduces novel traits into a population, but if my opponent mentions that, he will seem to be doing the very thing I've already biased the audience against. The 10 questions video attempts to do the same thing. At certain points, the narrator will say something like, some Christians might suggest. He then proceeds to describe that rebuttal using loaded words. He has poisoned the well. If any Christian did respond with an argument suggested by the narrator, his point has been made to seem predictable and weak.